Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Art of Doing Good and Well in Business. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you're going to see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. All right. Wonderful. Texas, amazing. Ghana, Virginia, Georgia. Thanks for joining, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Seattle, Philly. Awesome. Great to have you all here. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, I'm going to launch just a couple polls to step back and see how everyone's doing today. And we will use this information to guide our future development of programming. This first one's going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? I will give everyone just a couple moments to submit their responses here. Thank you so much. All right, gonna end the poll, share the results. Optimism is in the lead. It's always so great to see. Do have some feelings of anxiety and surviving. So I am hoping that our conversation today will help address some of those feelings. Gonna stop sharing this poll and launch the second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Give everyone a few more moments to think about it, submit an answer here. And this one just tells us more about your current entrepreneurial needs and priorities. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share the results. Okay, it looks like finance is in the lead, sales coming up behind, but we do have some priorities all across the board. So this is awesome. We will take this into account as we develop more programming for everyone. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing this poll, and without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Christal M. Jackson, president of Mosaic Genius and head in Heart Philanthropy. Christal, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. So excited to be with you.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, let's jump right in. So, you have spent your career in the social impact space and, have even founded 2 agencies working to improve social, economic, and educational outcomes for communities of color. So first, could you tell us just a little bit about some of the initiatives you've been part of or worked on over the years that have led you to the work that you do now?
Absolutely. People ask me often, how did you get started? And, my answer is pretty simple. I knew what I cared about, but I have to admit, I wasn't always certain how that would show up or manifest itself in a career.
Yeah.
And during my last year at Duke, I had the pleasure to intern with the Children's Defense Fund under the great Marian Wright Edelman. And it was the first time that I actually really worked in what I would call a very structured, forward nonprofit organization. And I went there under the guise really of looking for an opportunity to work to be an advocate for children because I care about kids. And I thought, well, this is that opportunity. And I realized that there were so many verticals to impact work. And at the end of my internship, Marion, with all of her wisdom, said to me, Christal, if you want to do this work, what you should do is learn how to raise money. And I was sort of introduced to I would say, the business of impact. And left there and had a great job with the United Negro College Fund. Again, an opportunity to work with young people. My core values is I believe education is super important. So I had the opportunity to sort of align those two. But over the years, because that's really sort of more what I would call the nonprofit lane. But over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with entrepreneurs and founders. And one of the things that I have cared deeply about is breaking barriers to access and opportunity. And so I've dedicated really almost the past 2 decades at breaking barriers to access and opportunity for entrepreneurs and founders of color.
Amazing. Yes. Oh, such exciting work. And I kind of love how you brought those two pieces together in a way that like you hadn't been able to perceive before, but only through what you experienced, you kind of learned about yourself to follow that path. So I think entrepreneurs can kind of like apply that same kind of thinking to their own journey, which is amazing.
Absolutely right. I think it's really important when you want to start a business is to really figure out what is the business, right? Like what is what's the business of the thing I care about? And when you think about ecosystems, right? Ecosystems help you better understand all the pieces to a puzzle. And I think once you identify that piece, if that piece is something that you care to solve for, then I think you have yourself an opportunity. You're probably a bona fide entrepreneur.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And it's such like a great mindset to have. And then do you just have like anyone or anything that you've experienced in your journey or someone you've met that's kind of like stuck with you and continues to inspire you in the work that you're doing every day? Maybe somebody who's kind of like been with you through this whole journey.
It's funny you say that. I'm a third generation entrepreneur.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, third generation entrepreneur. So I've been around entrepreneurship all of my life. But it's fun. I didn't think it was my path. Right. And so over the years, I realized how much I enjoy. I enjoy solving for a problem. So, so a couple of people I think about my grandfather, who provided jobs for people that probably would not have been able to find them in very structured environments, right? So I think about my grandfather. I think about my grandmother who provided jobs and opportunities and focused on developing the next generation of leaders. And she was very adamant about providing them opportunities. And so, I've been around people that have always at the core wanted to provide sort of access and opportunity. So I would say, my family has been a big part of my inspiration.
Ah, that's amazing. And that's so great to hear that kind of you kind of grew up in that exposure to that environment and the challenges that come with it. And, also the amazing experiences that come with it and how much you learn. So that's just such an incredible thing to have been surrounded by as a child.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say is I think there is a space not just for entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship. Because there are people that are, I believe, in probably more conservative, well, the conservative is not the word, traditional. I say more traditional environments. that have entrepreneurial skills, but really are looking for ways to use those skills.
Right.
One of the, entrepreneurs are innovative. So, I've had the chance to see that as well. I had a mentor that worked in the financial industry, but saw a need to introduce young people early to working in the finance industry. She carved out a nice lane within her company that allowed her to expose high school students to banking. So I was
Oh,
just,
wow.
yeah, I was in high school, right? But that's entrepreneurship, right? Which is
Yeah.
also something that I think, people can consider as another lane
Right.
in
Yeah.
terms
No,
of social impact.
totally. That's so important. And I think a lot of people, especially like those who kind of like identify with the word entrepreneurship, may not think about that or have considered that before. So it's so great that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so, the title of this event could kind of be open to interpretation, good and well, like that could kind of apply to a few different things. So I think I'd love to know kind of like what this means to you and, kind of specifically doing good and well in business, and how have you experienced that? What is it? How do you define it? That kind of thing.
Well, I think oftentimes I've had the privilege of meeting people, what I would say at their best. Typically when we meet or they engage me or they're concerned about how they can be a part of making the world better, right? So I think that's doing good, right? It's whatever that looks like, whatever your area of focus is. People are, they say, I want to do good. So doing good is, making the world a better place. I tend to use language that I learned from my mentor, Frida K. Klein. Doing good is sort of gap closing, making certain that whatever you are doing in business, you're not making it worse for those that don't have, right? That you're not making life worse for people. That can look like you're not increasing pollution to it could look like you're not making it harder for people to access good paying jobs. So whatever it is you're creating, you're doing good. And doing well is it's fiscal responsibility. You're able to generate revenue, right? You are able to generate revenue and returns without harming the environment. You're able to generate revenue and returns. That's the well part. Without without causing destruction, right? And so doing well is actually making a profit. And it's a good, and I tell people all the time, it's not a bad thing to make money. It's a great thing to make money because I believe when you have money, you have more resources. Money's a tool. I think of money as a tool. You have more resources so that you can then do good. So
Sure.
I think that they should go hand in hand.
I love that. And I also love kind of the distinction between the two, because I think it could cause entrepreneurs to ask themselves more deeper questions about like, what does this mean for my business in particular? Whereas like maybe they had previously like thought about those terms differently, or even as like one kind of similar term. So I love that because it really sparks that important thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And and it's not I tell people all the time, it's not a conversation you should be afraid to have and just say,
Yeah.
wait, is the work I'm doing, is it contributing to the type of world I want to live in? Whatever lane that is, right? If you are if you're making candles, are the chemicals harmful?
Yeah.
Right. So it can be something as simple as that. Or if I am working in ed tech, is the tool so important that it makes it even harder for people that really need it? They
Right.
can't access it. And I think a lot of times things happen if we don't analyze them, they'll happen by default, right? Because there's never or unintended consequences of something. I think when you do impact work, it opens up the space for you to sort of think more about, well, what are the consequences of A on B? So I think that's the difference when you're setting up sort of an impact strategy. I think those are the questions you really have to ask. It's not just, can I make a lot of money? But is it, what does my work, how does my work impact the world that I live in?
Awesome. And honestly, that leads so well into my next question. So like, sustainability and impact, these are kind of buzzwords that we use very commonly now in the business world. And so, for founders who are just starting out, what do these terms really mean? And you've given some examples already, but maybe if you could like dive into like some of like the different parts of the business, like how we see the meaning behind these terms actually show up in the businesses that we're like interacting with on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a good question. People ask me a lot about ESG. It's sort of the new language. I always think about it. I grew up in Texas. Well, I'm originally from Texas. My family has been in Texas since 1880.
Wow.
Interesting enough, the same land since 1880. So, at the core, I'm a country girl. So I think about agriculture, right? And what we were taught was create a life that you can sustain, whatever that looks like. And for me, when you talk about sustainability, it's the lessons that I learned early on about creating a life that you can sustain. And so beyond your life, let's create a world that we can sustain, right? So how can we be more self-sufficient as it relates to food production? How can we be more efficient and self-sufficient as it relates to pollution or the environment, right? How are we being kind to the environment that we have to live in, or are our actions not being kind to the environment that we have to live in? So when you think about sustainability, I try to tell people to not get so caught up in the language, but just think simplistically. Is what I'm doing going to contribute to the ongoing health of the world that I live in, right? And so when things are out of balance, so in other words, if you think about all the issues, this is debatable, right? So some people say there's no such thing as issues around climate change. Other people that live probably in the South along the Gulf Coast say, oh, yes, there is. When you think about the changes in weather patterns, right? So what are the things that contribute to these changes? I'm giving away advice to entrepreneurs. If I think a great thing to think about is what, as an entrepreneur or an innovator in this season, if you care about environment, what can I do to help slow down these changes or to correct some of these changes, right? So when you think about sustainability, I think it's a lot of thinking about the world we live in. Now, there are people who say it's more about governance. I think all the ESG, right? All of those things sort of align there. But I think for the sake of this conversation, because I work in social impact, I always think about the S. And that's the right. Like, how do we create a society that's sustainable? So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it totally does. And I really love that you're kind of answering the question by asking yourself questions, because that's something that entrepreneurs can do as they're like making a daily decision. It's like, how is this decision going to impact people? How is it going to impact the community? Whatever it may be. And that's a question they can regularly kind of just ask themselves to assess how they're doing in that respect. So it's super simple. I love it.
And I think it's good because, let's be honest, if you're an entrepreneur, you have a full list of things you have to think about in the course of the day. And this work is not necessarily intuitive.
Right.
right? And it's okay that it's not intuitive because you think of business, it's competitive. I'm here to make money. So these things are not necessarily intuitive, but
Mhm.
I think that for the absolutely, this list is nonstop. It's on the chat, right? So,
Right. Yeah.
don't beat yourself up if you've not thought about it before, because it's not intuitive. But I just would say going forward,
Mhm.
these are the things that I would ask if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm leading a company and I'm interested in making certain that my organization, right,
Mhm.
is, I would say, aligned around certain social impact strategies. So these are things that every now and then it's okay to maybe like just reassess every quarter.
Right. Yeah. No, that's such a good practice to kind of just integrate regularly and kind of get used to, and it's gonna benefit you in the long run. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
And then, so for founders who might be like later in their business journey, then might already have like a loyal customer base, a built out sales funnel, established marketing and distribution channels.
Mm-hmm.
How might they begin to understand the way that their current and potential buyers perceive the purpose at the core of the terms? And then how they perceive how well your business is aligned with that purpose?
Yeah. Well, listen, if anyone has a business that they've been able to maintain and it's been successful, first of all, I want to say, don't go making a lot of pivots, right? Because you want your business to function well. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's simple. I think don't make it complicated.
Hmm.
I poll your stakeholders, poll your clients, incentivize them to be engaged and answer those questions, right? And you would be surprised that what you will uncover. I'm I'm fairly certain that what you will uncover is probably even a new business vertical
Hmm.
or a way to enhance your business. See, social impact, I think, is so broad that people are intimidated by it.
Yeah.
Excuse me, they don't want to interrupt their business, which I think I get. And I think, the way we've lived for the past 3 years, people also think it's very narrow in some ways around social justice. And
Hmm.
that's not it as well. I think that can be a lane.
Hmm.
But when you just start to think in general about social impact and whatever your business is, I'm certain that over the past 3 years, we've all made adjustments
Yeah.
because we've been impacted, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so I think about what are the ways in which my business can be of better service to even my existing clientele. That's social impact.
Yeah.
Another way to think about social impact can be, what is a way I can be as an employer?
Hmm.
What is a way that I can support the people that work for me? Right.
Hmm.
So it's all of those things. And sometimes if we go too far outside of our company thinking about social impact,
Hmm.
forget that there are people inside that we can impact. And part of your impact strategy can be, you are a great employer.
Right.
Right. Sometimes it's you are a great employer. I don't want to give away a lot, but there was a company, I'll
Sure.
share the story. We were talking and they were talking to me about, what they want to do. And they had this sort of really very established company. And they
Hmm.
had a pretty narrow sort of idea about impact. And I said, well, that's good. But I said, you know what I think about your company? A story you've not told well is that you have been responsible for creating probably more wealth in communities of color. And you've probably been the leading leadership training opportunity for inner city young people. And when I say inner city young people, I literally mean that those that live in big cities that
Hmm.
may not have access to training programs or
Right.
expensive extracurricular activities,
Hmm.
they tend to end up having jobs at this company as their first job. And I said to them, you need to think about that as being a leader. You've been training leaders. They totally didn't put that together, right?
Right.
Like in theory they have, but if you go back and assess that, like you put that on paper, that's impact. And I
Mhm.
think so many of us, because I just still believe there are good people in the world.
Mhm.
And I still believe that there are people that genuinely want to do good, right?
Right.
Exist. And I
Mhm.
think that sometimes there's so much other noise,
Mhm.
we we forget that
Right.
every day someone's doing some act of kindness,
Mhm.
someone's engaged in some work or some opportunity or some activity that
Mhm.
is making where they live better.
Mhm.
That's social impact.
Right. I love that. I love that. And that really kind of makes me, you know, think about how when we are creating impact with an initiative, like we don't we might understand what our customers want, but we might not be in the best position to deliver that. And so I kind of want to ask you, like, what are some ways that founders can kind of evaluate whether or not they are the right person or they are the right business to kind of like take lead on creating impact or like solutions in a certain like space.
Well, I think it's good sometimes to not know, right?
Mhm.
Because if you think you know, then you've closed the door
Yeah,
right, on discovery.
yeah, I love that.
Right. I think so. So it's okay to not know, like, wait, are we doing this? Right. And I think for resources, I think these same resources are good for established companies, right? So I
Mhm.
I would recommend, as objectively, I would recommend looking at business schools
Mhm.
that have some social impact curriculum, right? And in all fairness, it's still a fairly new sort of discipline. It's still
Mhm.
a fairly new vertical.
Mhm.
But a place I would look at business schools, right? Because think about it, they have the expertise and research where they've actually sort of analyzed how this impacts business.
Right.
And out of that, they've also, I think, they provide, by doing that, they provide what are some of the necessary skills and tools that
Mhm.
people should have right in place. And so I would recommend that, and everything's, you can research everything online now, but there are quite a few business schools that are starting to talk more about impact and the discipline of it. I
Right.
think that's a great resource and a great place to start for entrepreneurs.
Yes, that's super helpful and like just so many great ideas and things for entrepreneurs to think about. And I also wanted to mention from what you said before, I love kind of that example that you gave of this business that like didn't realize that they were like training leaders, because I'm sure that like every founder here is making some sort of impact that they don't like haven't exactly put into words yet or like realized. So it's like, just because right now you don't know exactly what that is, doesn't mean you're
That's
not
right.
doing it. And you might even be creating more impact than you originally thought. So it's
Absolutely.
amazing.
No, absolutely. And so that's why I think, when I said earlier, it's not necessarily intuitive.
Mhm.
What I do think is intuitive is people want to do good. I believe that, right?
Yeah.
And whatever that looks like, it's based in a lot of ways on lived experience, right? But
Right.
I think that that part's intuitive. I think what we don't know intuitively is what are the steps to getting there. And
Right.
I have a saying all the time when I talk to entrepreneurs: don't boil the ocean, right? Don't try to boil the ocean. right?
Yeah.
If you say, again, if your social impact is going to be being a great place for people to work,
Mhm.
that's a great strategy. If your social impact is going to be something, it can be something like we're going to make certain that all of the local elementary schools in
Mhm.
this zip code have beautiful lawns.
Yeah.
We're going to plant flowers, right? That's our activity, right?
Right.
Whatever. And listen, that matters,
Mhm.
right? So whatever the case is, I think it is okay if it is through the lens of your lived experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like a great like framework to kind of go by. That's awesome.
Mhm.
So kind of switching gears a little bit, but also to something you just touched on a bit. You know, once a founder is kind of confident about like how they want to create an impact with their business in the world, they're going to need like a strategy to
Yeah.
follow. And so I want to kind of touch on like a couple different like founder scenarios and like how it might address that. But first, kind of like personally for you, if you like think back about like some of the earlier social impact initiatives you've worked on or witnessed, can you talk about like the challenges you or they faced? Something, maybe you wish you knew that could have given you more confidence or support to lead those initiatives with greater success.
Yeah, I think that, in hindsight, I guess I'll sort of start with some of those that were challenging.
Sure.
Uh, Culture is extremely important, right?
Mhm.
And understanding the culture of the company or the culture of where people live is very important
Right.
because I have seen scenarios where the intent was to do good,
Mm-hmm.
but it was not a cultural fit. And if it's not a cultural fit, it can come off as being offensive.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
right. So you want to make certain that you are doing something that that community will appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
that the community understands. Again, otherwise, I think you can be seen as not being helpful, but being more harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And those things happen when we ask questions.
Right.
I think about a really big organization that I watched had very good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
They moved into a local community and they were going to provide X service. And
Mm-hmm.
they did provide it, but they never talked to the people that they went to help. So they
Mm.
made the assumption that they knew what was best. And it worked for a little while,
Sure.
but after a while, it didn't work anymore,
Yeah.
right? That's right. They were not appreciated. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are doing something, and I'll use an example, that's why listening tours are important. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's important to find out from people what
Yeah.
they want. Because I've seen people make big investments, millions of dollars. And
Mm-hmm.
that's right, ask the questions, right? And so one example I'll use is I remember helping people understand the difference in people that have had to live below poverty all their lives, the way they see the world versus the way someone that's had privilege all of their life sees the world. There
Mm-hmm.
are books that are available that you can read. And, so I think make certain that whatever it is you are attempting to do to benefit or to be helpful, you should always sort of understand the cultural nuances and ask questions because my lived experience is different.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of social impact, is it validates the existence of all kind.
Yeah.
And because you've had a lived experience doesn't certainly mean your life isn't valid, right?
Yeah,
So how you get right? It just means I've had a different lived experience.
totally.
And right. Which I think is, which I think that's where I think social impact and DE and I differ.
Mm-hmm.
I think social impact is about lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
It is not about forcing people to accept difference,
Yes.
right? But what you cannot disregard is the way a person has lived. A
Yeah.
young woman came to me a couple of weeks ago and she was on a panel. I'll give an example. She was
Mm-hmm.
on a panel and she was going to have to address the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to her, I said, well, first of all, you can only share what you've lived,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the people next to you on the
Mm-hmm.
panel can only share with you what they've lived.
Right.
And immediately she said, oh, wait, yeah, that's right. I said, absolutely. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, you all have just had different journeys, but guess what? You all now do the same thing at this institution. You perform, you have the same occupation,
Mm-hmm.
you had different paths to this experience. What social impact does is it makes room for all of those journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And that circles back to sustainability. Now, does it mean that we are all going to probably have to make pivots in those journeys? Of course.
Right.
We pivot all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But it does not negate the lived experience of people.
Yes, I love that. And it's just something that entrepreneurs can kind of keep at the forefront of their mind when they're thinking about like putting together their strategy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to the Q&A, so maybe we can run through these three a little bit quickly, but just three founder scenarios, kind of just like around like the development of your impact strategy. So for founders who might be operating as like a solopreneur, kind of like doing all the roles of the business,
Yeah.
what resources or external support systems exist that could help them develop that impact strategy?
I'll just say this, your family and friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, your family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them a question, go to them. What do they care about? What are they thinking about? What's keeping them up? How can what you are doing, how can your work affect them or impact them in a positive way? So I would say first, go to your family and friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that hopefully most of us can do, and
Yeah.
just such a great resource to have and kind of like peek into people's minds to get that
And I'll say this. That's why that use your social media for that, right? Ask questions if whatever social media platform you're on, use your social media outlets to
Mm-hmm.
find out what people are thinking, what they care about. I think that's a great way
Mm-hmm.
to sort of assess.
Amazing. And so for founders who might be looking to add new members to their team, how can they ensure that the people they're bringing on are aligned with the values and mission of the business? Like, especially if they're going to be working like directly with like the impact strategy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's important, and I'm not an HR specialist, but there are, I know, assessments you can give
Mm-hmm.
to make certain that it's a good fit, right? That people are aligned and have shared values. Because
Right.
what you don't want is to try to force someone into a way of thinking that's
Sure.
not aligned with your core values. So I would check with chief people officers or HR folks about what are some of the tools and assessments you can give, and then that way you can prevent a lot of the probably hard conversations down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Both sides.
Awesome. That's perfect.
Mhm.
And so then lastly, for founders who are already leading a team, Now they're looking to make like new impact with their business or kind of discover how they are already making impact with their business.
Mhm.
What are your tips when it comes to managing a team or distribution of responsibility for that impact strategy?
How do you manage it? Because create committees within the
Mm,
organization. A
yeah.
lot of time, right? I think I highly recommend that create committees within.
Hmm.
Give people an opportunity to demonstrate leadership.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great sort of leadership development tool, particularly for middle management,
Hmm.
for new members to a team. I think it's a great, creating these committees internally, I think is a great opportunity.
That's awesome. I love kind of like the idea of like creating like that separate structural system within your business that focuses specifically around the impact strategy. And that would kind of like help people like get
Mhm,
into the mindset as well.
mhm.
Okay. So, of course, we're going to need to kind of like regularly assess your impact strategy. All founders are going to need to do this. So, and there are going to be different considerations that they have to take into account. So, you might be generating amazing impact in the ways that you'd hoped, or, in new ways that you had discovered, through your offering or another initiative. But what strategies can you implement to recognize parts of your impact strategy that are unsustainable or even harmful?
If someone in the chat put in here, reach out to other organizations, and that's where I was going to go for that, right? I
Mhm.
think, you know, I always feel like there's really nothing is really new.
Yeah.
And so if there is a company that is doing something that you think is pretty cool or interesting, reach out to their CSR person, their corporate social responsibility person, if they have one.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's their CSR person or maybe their person in marketing, but I'm certain they would be willing to like share with you. I've never had any story where a person reached out to a company to sort of commend them on doing well and tell
Right.
them that they were interested in learning from them. Yeah,
Hmm.
people are helpful, tend to be very helpful. And that's what I would do. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. But if there's someone that's doing something well or you see it's effective, reach out to them.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. You kind of have to like, sometimes I think there's like an aspect of like stepping out of your comfort zone, in that regard that can be a little bit, scary, but
Yeah.
so worth it.
So worth it.
Awesome. So I think it's just about time for Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have a question for Christal, please submit it in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, let's jump right in.
Yeah.
So, we have questions kind of like all across the board here on like different aspects of what we talked about here, but
Okay.
kind of on like the fundraising aspect of things, how especially for companies that are not nonprofits that are making profit, how to sell the business as a business that does good instead of like a nonprofit or like a charity, and like how do you kind of communicate that in when you are seeking out funding, and like those kinds of conversations?
So are you trying to literally sell the business for acquisition, or are you trying to encourage people? Are you pitching your business, right?
Yeah, this would be like a situation of like a pitch, basically. You're trying to like raise money. So you're kind of trying, how do you talk about it in a way that kind of, brings out those same kinds of feelings that come from the work that like nonprofits or charities might do, but
Yeah.
as a business that, brings in revenue.
I think it's very important to make certain people know that you're for profit if that's what you are
Yeah.
doing, right?
Mhm.
So I think people need to make certain, because giving and putting money in a charity is different from putting the money. There are tax and legal ramifications for all of that. So I think, one, if you are a for-profit, you need to make certain people know that. And if you're not for-profit, people should know that. And if your impact strategy is a strategy that's going to drive revenue, I would talk about it all the time, right? And then if it's not, it can just sort of be baked into the business and say, this is something we do as a result of doing well, we will do good, right? I think there's a way to frame it. But if that impact strategy is going to drive revenue, I think go with that. If not, I would just show that it's sort of baked into the business and it's one of the things we care about. It's something that you care about.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love it. This is a really interesting question, I think. So, we may have like an impact initiative or an impact strategy. And especially if it's like something that is close to home, we really care about, there's like a personal journey involved. If there's like, if running into obstacles or like kind of like running into a wall, those kinds of moments, how do you kind of get up again and keep going and kind of, push away or, kind of address those like negative thoughts that can so easily come up?
As in for entrepreneurs? Yeah. Entrepreneurship is hard. Like there is no, I wish I could sit here and tell you that it is great every day. But it is challenging. And I think in the environment that we live in, where people are inundated with information all day, there's so much so fast that it's even harder to keep people's attention, right? So I think that, so I just want to level set there. Don't beat yourself up. It is very, very hard. Successful entrepreneurs that I've studied over the years, what they've done is it's more than an ocean. Successful entrepreneurs solve, is that my friend Jocelyn right there? Successful entrepreneurs solve problems, right? And so at the core, that's what I've seen, like that it is, I'm solving for something, right? And so I think you have to keep in mind what you're solving for. And I honestly, if I had not been doing work that was impact driven, I don't know that I would still be an entrepreneur because it's so hard. So for me, what I've had to keep in the forefront is my work is solving a problem. And if I don't get up and do this every day, who else is going to do it, right? And if I don't do it, then I can't complain. Right? It's
totally. I love that.
And I can't complain. And it is Jocelyn. Yay. And what I would say is just from a mental health sort of component, you didn't ask this, but I'm going to add it, is I would try to create community with other entrepreneurs. Now, all of your friends don't have to be entrepreneurs, but I do think that it would be great if you exist in community with other people that are, entrepreneurs. It helps, right? Like some of these conversations with people that have jobs where they're not responsible for everything, they're looking like, oh, no, I didn't, oh, you have to do that too. Yes, I have to do that too. Right? So I think being in community with other entrepreneurs is very important.
Awesome. That's amazing. Perfect. And so, I think something that's really important to consider is how, most businesses rely on, other businesses to some degree to do their work, whether they're using a software or they have a partnership or whatever it may be. So how can these organizations that are trying to do purposeful, meaningful work, how can they kind of like assess opportunities that might come their way?
Well, one of the things I would say is when you think about impact work, right? You think about what really sort of sets it up differently from charitable work is have metrics in place, right? So can I measure the impact as a result of what my inputs are, right? To use that language. Can I trace my investment, my input, my investment? Can I trace that back to some outcome? That's a really good way to say if you're having an impact. Because sometimes you're just doing something because it's nice, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But in business, right? Like and sometimes it's okay to be, if you can be nice just to be nice, be nice. But if you're thinking about business and you're trying to really think about, am I having impact? Can you measure it? Right? What's changing as a result of me doing this? Or what changes as a result of me not doing this? I think having tools in place to measure results is very important.
Yes, super, super important. Love that we kind of emphasize that, because the process, you don't really just create it and then let it happen. You are just, it's a constantly evolving, process that you're a constantly improving process, hopefully. So that's just so important. And then, so a lot of founders here might be leading a company with a co-founder. So I think this is kind of an important question to touch on. If you are kind of at a point where you as the founder are looking to create impact and your business partner is more comfortable with the status quo, how do you kind of approach this topic and that like conversation with them, or like move forward with the business? How do you like, what would you suggest in terms of like best practices there?
There could be some values not aligned. I think in everything, we'll use the language of budget.
Yeah.
Okay. Typically, when you're planning for the year, you think about that, your budget allocation. And so I think a way to start it is if you have any, I hate to use this term, fat or extra, perhaps that's where you can start, because 9 times out of 10, that person's entered business to make money. They didn't enter business to think about saving the world. So I think if you can start by saying, what can we allocate? Like I would change the language. What can we allocate towards A, B, C, D? If we have capital we can allocate, or do we have human capital? I would start the conversation there. I think that's a fair place to start, because the intent is to have a business that create revenue. And then after that, you can then say, what are we going to allocate? Now, if that other partner wants to really demonstrate, some commitment to impact, then he or she can say, I'm going to either allocate X amount in revenue from my own revenue, if they're in a position to do that. Or if they're not, they can say, I'm going to allocate this much of my time to X, right? And I think, you have to lead by example, but I also think you have to be fair in the sense that people have entered business to make money. And this is for businesses that are already in existence, right? So I'm not saying something that's new that you're forming, but if you formed this a while ago and now things have evolved and this is what you care about, I think that would be a way to approach the conversation.
Yeah, that's amazing. Such a great starting point to think about. That's super helpful. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So, a lot of the entrepreneurs here are probably leading smaller companies. And I think it can be really easy to get stuck in a way of thinking of like, I don't have enough money to kind of make the sustainable choice.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts or advice on like how smaller businesses like can start implementing sustainability in their business models without the huge costs?
Yeah, because it's hard.
Yeah.
And I would say start small.
Yeah.
Start small.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something as simple as the decision to, if I'll use it as an example, I work for a company that cared about the environment. And
Mm-hmm.
what they decided was one day a week, people could work from home because they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have to take public transportation. I'm just using that as an example.
Right.
That was small. So it didn't cost the company, in fact, probably made the light bill cheaper, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I would start small, whatever it is, wherever you can start, just start small. Because again, back to don't try to boil the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much noise about there's just so much noise.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say start small and over time build. And you will be surprised what those small steps turn into.
Yeah, that's so important, like kind of thinking more in the long term, and like it can be hard when you're not like seeing those immediate results, but that's like a good way to think about it because it can happen over time. Okay, so before we close out, if you had one piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with the audience, either from this conversation or from your personal journey, what would that be?
I would say make certain whatever it is you want to impact, right? So however you decide, you want to show up or you want your social impact to be, I would make certain that it is something that you can measure. And here's why. Entrepreneurship, I alluded to it earlier. It's difficult. It's hard, right?
Totally.
And having something concrete that you can reflect upon is what's going to keep you going. Yeah. Oftentimes what I do, I read letters. One of the things that I do is I host a gathering on Martha's Vineyard. And I have kept letters from people that have written me and said, I didn't know this was possible for me.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah. And that's a tool that being able to look back and as a measurement. And every time I see them win and now they're thriving and they're doing big things, I smile.
Exciting.
Right. I think about when 6 or 7 years ago, they thought this was not possible for them.
Totally.
And they saw it. So part of my impact is I help people understand what's possible for them. And as entrepreneurs, believe it or not, there's someone somewhere watching what you do. And what you're saying to them is, by continuing, you're saying to them, it's possible.
Love it. Christal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It was just such a pleasure on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone in attendance today. We are just so grateful that you joined us.
Thank you so much. It's so great to see so many people and need to stay connected. They know how to find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on what's another platform I'll pay attention to often? Instagram, but it definitely you can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah. And we're going to have more ways to have more engagement like this with people free in a way that it's free and we can share with entrepreneurs. So thank you again.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us for upcoming webinars. You can view them using the link that's going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.